You sit there when you're little before you get into this, and you're like, yeah, I want to play arenas, and I want to tour bus. You know, what would that be like to be at that level and hang out around other famous people? And anybody that says they don't think about that shit is a fucking liar, you know?
Popular music is a multifaceted, hard-to-define phenomenon. Compared with so many other creative art forms that have evolved over the years, it is arguably the fastest-growing and most experimental. In the 30 years between the 1960s and 1990s, we have seen the advent of psychedelia, progressive rock, disco, funk, hip-hop, rap, acid house, and drum and bass, to name but a few musical styles. Numerous new ideas have been developed which push the boundaries of music even further. Few other arts have been so universally significant. There has also been little else more exciting. Leading a rock star's life may well have become a cliché in modern times, but the spirit of sex, drugs, and rock and roll continues to live on as strong as ever. As long as there is fun to be had, the music and those who play it will be there to live the dream. Often, it is this music that provides an escape route to people stuck in their otherwise ordinary lives. A hard day at the office or studying in the classroom may not seem so bad after feeling an adrenaline rush from listening to your favourite song. For those who don't want to live a run-of-the-mill existence, it's rock and roll that is there to save them. People identify with it on all levels, and the world would not be the same, nor as much fun without it. But music needs to revolutionise and develop in order to remain exciting, interesting, controversial, and dangerous. However, artists have to be sure that their music is not only revolutionary and that it wins people over, but also that it keeps them satisfied. There is often the temptation, once you strike the big time, to stick to the formula that originally made you successful. The saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't try to fix it. And that is not very revolutionary at all. From the 1980s to the late 1990s, the number of those musicians openly living the rock and roll dream had dwindled considerably. Obviously, the kids were still having fun, but aside from in the pages of the rock press and on the dance floors in Ibiza, it was not too apparent. For the first time in living memory, there was an absence of a widespread subculture, such as acid house or punk, with which young people could identify. Not since the mid-1970s, when punk first broke and irreversibly shook up both the world and the music business, had there been any dramatic change in the music scene. Of course, there have been some exceptions. Take the Happy Mondays, one of the most wild, outrageous bands of modern times, who dragged the sex, drugs and rock and roll message screaming from the 80s to the 90s. The Red Hot Chili Peppers are another example, whose tales of life on the road are legendary. Rockers Aerosmith are a textbook case too, and their frontman Steve Tyler and Joe Perry scaled new heights in the quest for music biz excess. It can surely be no coincidence that these three bands all have one thing in common. Not only did they live for the rock and roll dream, but they were also innovators. Never musically conservative and not once sticking to the straight and narrow, they were exciting because they were daring and different. The way they achieved this was simple. They blended different styles of music into something strange and unique, but at the same time, quite fantastic. A notable example of this was Aerosmith's 1986 collaboration with hip-hop trio Run DMC. The track they recorded together was Walk This Way, which was to become an instant classic and a global smash hit. It also became known as being the first commercially successful instance of heavy rock music colliding head-on with hip-hop and rap. It was to start a new chapter in music history as being the definitive crossover of musical genres. Thereafter, rap would find its way into the repertoire of bands like the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Rage Against the Machine. Rock would likewise infiltrate the music of Ice-T, the Beastie Boys, and hundreds of other hip-hop style acts. If all this was not enough, dance, folk, psychedelia, and virtually all other styles of music entered the mix. With the breakthrough of sampling, the music industry had now become a gigantic melting pot. Never before had so much been blended together to form so many new sounds. But in the late 1990s, this crossover of styles may easily have faded away for good. Just like in the pre-punk 1970s, music had once more become very generic. Rock was now, more often than not, just simply rock, whereas dance was getting more and more purist in its outlook. Even the term crossover had somehow become a standard style in itself. Perhaps there was nothing left to be mixed together. Maybe there was nothing new to take a crack at. And even if there was anyone going to have a good time trying? Of course there was. Living the life of a rock star and making music that was a glorious myriad of styles was something that one young lad from Detroit aspired to from a very young age. His name? Robert Ritchie, known to you and me as Kid Rock.
Picked apples for a while when I was young. I grew up in an apple orchard. Portered cars in Manhattan at Manhattan Ford for, 7, 8 months. And I never really had to hold down. I got a record deal with Jive when I was like 18, so I pretty much did music all the time. That's what I always did.
Kid Rock was born Robert James Ritchie on January the 17th, 1971. He grew up in a small, suburban, middle-class town called Romeo, situated 40 miles north of Detroit, in the state of Michigan. Needless to say, there was not much excitement to be had in Romeo. Kid soon grew resentful towards the area and frustrated with this conservative provincial society which he constantly referred to as a hick town. He also found his early family life difficult. Coming from a strict Catholic background, he had high moral expectations thrust upon him. Going to church every Sunday became expected of him, and swear words were positively taboo, punishable by washing your mouth out with soap and warm water. Slightly ironic, really, as Kid Rock is one of the most explicit and foul-mouthed rock stars around today. Along with moral responsibilities, he was also given a lot of hard work to do. Growing up in a rural area meant that he had to take a hand in the chores and help with feeding the family's horses, cleaning out the stables, picking apples, and mowing huge acres of grass. This was not how most young kids would want to spend their time, and soon he began to get bored and bad-tempered. Being the third of 4 children in the family ensured that he would always be vying for attention. Often his parents would hold lavish parties for their friends and family. Sure enough, when these parties were in full swing, the young kid would dress up in a cowboy hat and boots and entertain the assembled throng with a selection of classic country songs. This gave him his first experience of performing, and from the young Bob Ritchie, the Kid Rock alter ego began to emerge. It was during his teenage years that he discovered an enthusiasm for doing what would eventually make him his name: DJing. One day, when watching the television, he saw someone scratching and mixing records on some decks. Instantly smitten with the idea, he naturally wanted to try the same thing himself. However, spinning felt on his mother's stereo and scratching Beatles records using the volume knob was not going to get him the right results. Also, breaking the stereo made him rather unpopular with his folks. Undaunted, he saved up enough money to buy his own proper DJ turntables. In next to no time, he became a natural at mixing and scratching records and discovered that he could skillfully merge together all his favourite musical styles. Along with this came a passion for a brand new craze that was now sweeping the nation: hip-hop. His previous attraction to more standard rock music had now taken a backseat, and Kid was now a burgeoning b-boy, going to every hip-hop and rap show that he could find. In tandem with this, he joined a local breakdancing crew, the Furious Funkers. As well as becoming an expert DJ, he was now proving himself to be a mean body mover. This ultimately earned him his nickname, as people would remark to themselves as they watched him breakdance: "Look at that white Kid Rock." Before long, he was in great demand. High school dances, talent shows, youth clubs and local parties all wanted his expertise on the decks and his skills at selecting the best sounds for a wicked party vibe. One night, at one of these events, he met one of the few black kids from the town, who invited him to a party in the Mount Clements district in northeast Detroit. Before too long, the word of the young 15-year-old Kid Rock was spreading like wildfire. However, still living in the village of Romeo, Kid was jaded and unhappy, and sought attention in less positive ways. Bad school grades and unruly conduct, coupled with instances of petty vandalism and threatening behaviour, meant that he was never out of trouble for long. His family would not let him go unpunished, and in the end, it all became too much for him. At the age of 17, he left home for good. Running away to the area where his reputation was fast spreading proved the next important step in his life. For someone who grew up with a love of hip-hop, rap, rock and partying, there was no better place to be than Detroit.
It's not that I didn't care about school, but I just realized there was nothing there for me. You know, teachers would look at me and ask me what my problem was, and I'd just tell them, like, you're not showing me anything that's in any way at all useful in my life. I know how to communicate, I have a good sense of street smarts, and I know how to count money. And other than that, it's all about, you know, focusing on my talent. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. It's just not a good vocational school for rock and roll, you know, chorus class, go in there and, you know, learn how to pitch up to an E off a piano with some lady, you know, in a xylophone. You're like, no.
Having made the move from a simple hick town to a bustling, happening city, Kid now fitted into his surroundings perfectly. It was to also prove a huge musical influence. The music of Kid Rock is a cauldron of many different musical styles. Although most notably he blends rock with rap, dig a little deeper and you will discover country, blues, funk and hundreds of other genres. Such a mixture of influences is down in no small part to the city of Detroit and the Michigan area. Having grown up in this city, Kid was able to experience a variety of musical forms. Think Detroit, and artists such as MC5, Iggy Pop and the Stooges and Ted Nugent often spring to mind. But it is also known for being a city with a vibrant alternative scene. On the one hand, there was the FM radio-friendly rock that blasted from the airwaves. On the other, new styles and beats that were emerging from the underground also had a huge positive influence. Developing a passion for both rock and rap, Kid would listen to a wide assortment of bands and types of music. Bob Seger and the Beastie Boys, Led Zeppelin and LL Cool J, Hank Williams and Houdini, and Leonard Skinner and the Sugar Hill Gang were all particular favourites of his. It's small wonder that the music he would make later on in life would be so diverse and wide-ranging. Now that Detroit was his home turf, life had changed considerably. As he was no longer living with a large family, he was instead hanging out in the ghettos and housing estates, having to do anything he could to survive. Washing cars, picking apples and cutting grass only gave him meagre earnings, and he had no choice but to stay with friends, sleeping on their floors. Drug culture played a big part in the area, and Kid was no stranger to the scene. Often he would have to sell crack to bolster his earnings, and when he wasn't selling drugs, he was doing them. Sometimes he would take anything he could get his hands on, from coke to cough syrup. These were certainly not sober times, but now at least he had his independence, and the time with which to develop his escalating flair for performing. Knowing how to lay down a good groove, and how to kick up a thrilling party vibe, he continued to DJ at nightly basement parties, underground nightclubs, talent shows, and for local rap crews. By now, he had made his indelible mark on the Mount Clements area and the city of Detroit. Although being white in a predominantly black neighbourhood did not make it easy for him, his reputation quickly overshadowed his skin colour. It was not long before he became a local hero for his skills on the turntables and his insatiable appetite for a good time. In 1988, at the age of 18, he had cut his first demos. Now he had finally put down on record his awesome DJing skills and his lewd, street-smart raps. Already his mixture of styles and mean attitude was beginning to shine through. These demos finally fell into the hands of D Nice, a member of the hip-hop crew Boogie Down Productions. This was the turning point. Kid Rock was ready to take the world by storm.
First record with Jive, I don't know what that's at, couple 100,000 copies. And then my real independent releases out of my basement, of which I was just selling in Detroit, I was selling like 15,000 of those at a time.
There was no better crew than Boogie Down Productions to break Kid Rock onto an unsuspecting world. Founded by hip-hop pioneer and preacher KRS-One, they had earned a cult following and reputation for breaking new talent. Now, with the support of D-Nice and fellow rapper Too Short, they were offering him an opening slot in their live shows. This was not an opportunity to be passed up, and still at a young age, Kid Rock was entertaining hundreds of hip-hop fans with his filthy rhymes and brazen charisma. Unsurprisingly, the crowd took a little time to adjust to him, with gigs sometimes erupting into skirmishes. Being young and white meant he had to earn his respect and reputation all over again, but this time to a much wider and more experienced audience. However, the gamble paid off. Rob Bass, another famous hip-hop artist, also took him on as an opening act. Now, more people than ever had witnessed this young white kid who sure could rock. The next stage was to get wider exposure, and this meant securing a record deal. Once again, it was Boogie Down Productions that were to assist him with this task. Having impressed the crew and the crowds with his lavish, entertaining performances, Jive Records, who also had the Boogie Down crew on its books, were quick to give the kid his first record contract. He, of course, was also quick to sign. For new talent, this was a great label to be on. As well as D-Nice and Too Short, legends such as A Tribe Called Quest, Houdini and Kool Moe Dee were also included on its roster. Being part of the same unit as many of the hip-hop legends he had grown up with was now no longer a dream. It was a reality. With this business and financial backing, Kid Rock recorded his first album in 1990. Grit Sandwiches for Breakfast was a typical rock and rap fuse, with production work from Too Short, D-Nice and Chuck Chillout. Rapidly becoming an underground classic, the record embraced the b-boy and rock and roll lifestyle, revelling in its rebellious party spirit and the world of sex and drugs. However, he was still only 19, and knowing virtually nothing about the music industry, the whole process was a learning experience. Instead of making a promotional video, which is the standard practice for those with new records, he embarked on a 40-city US tour. As the opening act for NWA legend Ice Cube, plus Too Short, Yo-Yo and rappers The Poor Righteous Teachers, the tour was a massive success, being attended by hundreds and thousands of hip-hop fans. A promotional video may well have been easier, but not quite so much fun, nor would it have bought him so much on-the-road experience. For the first time in his career, Kid Rock was now exposed to a national audience. Sales of Grit Sandwiches for Breakfast escalated, and his reputation as a rock and roll, lewd and crude, living the dream party animal was spreading far beyond the city of Detroit. By now, he had strayed away from the area, having moved to New York City, and rumour has it that while there, he even became a close neighbour of the hip-hop superstar Queen Latifah. With tours, records, famous neighbours, and of course non-stop partying, the spotlight was now well and truly upon him. Yet for someone who was as loud and proud as the kid, there was no way that he was going to win support from everyone.
Seems like people are just starting to lighten up a lot. It's the same thing when back in the day, Elvis was supposed to shake his hips and now you can walk out there in your underwear and sing. People are coming around and realizing that's not the end of the world.
The saying goes that if something is good, some mug out there is going to want to ban it. Kid Rock and his music was obviously going to be no exception. Very often in music and cultural history, if young people are seen to be having fun outside of conventional rules, moral campaigners will want to see the end of it. With Kid Rock, on the other hand, it is likely that he set himself up to be deliberately controversial. After all, that is surely what it means to be a rock star. Even if his lyrics about his liberal lifestyle were honest and true enough, It wasn't long before he soon induced the wrath of critics, conservatives, and radio programmers. The argument at first centred on one specific track, which was the opening song on his first album. Entitled Yodeling in the Valley, it was certain, even to the most innocent of listeners, that it was about the joys of oral sex. Despite it not being too graphic in its descriptions, metaphors such as shot of whiskey were wrapped with conviction, and one university college radio station immediately found itself in hot water for playing it. The college president even called it the most indecent thing he'd ever heard in his life. The station, based at the New York State University, ended up with a charge of airing obscene, indecent or profane language by means of radio communication. The result was a government-imposed fine of nearly $25,000. Normally, it would have just been $12,000, but the figure was adjusted due to the so-called extreme nature of the material. The magnitude of the fine was obviously absurd, and the government body that imposed it, FCC, was on the receiving end of bad press and tremendous ridicule. The fine was eventually dropped when they lost a new music seminar debate with none other than Mr. Kid Rock himself. Yet there is no such thing as bad press as far as Kid Rock is concerned. This episode not only helped to outrage the conservative Midwest of America, but also delighted its rebellious youth in one foul swoop. In other words, this was a classic rock and roll political act. Now, not only was he famous, but he was also notorious. His agenda was set: to not simply have a good time all of the time, but also to give everyone who was bored and disaffected with life something to hang on to. For all those whose dream it was not to go to school but to hang out in fast cars, have lots of money and pull beautiful women, the attitude that they wanted to hear was coming straight from Kid Rock. If anyone didn't like what he was doing, then that was tough. Unfortunately, quite a lot of people didn't like it. And this was anyone but Kid's fault. The timing of his breakthrough, as it turned out, could not have been worse.
I take the talent part very serious. I think that's maybe where people, if anyone was to even feel threatened by me, I'm not saying they are, but if they were, I think that's what would threaten them. It's not my hat. It's not anything else but just raw talent that's put into it out there, and people realize they can't do that. They haven't worked hard enough all those years like I have. Like, I'm not worried about anybody. I've worked so hard for so many years, and I know what I'm good at. And there's not really anybody that I think that can come out there and threaten me on the stage.
White artists in hip-hop are comparatively rare. Often it is said that black people are the ones who innovate, whilst whites are the ones who replicate. Such a statement may not be true all the time and for all styles of music, but it is certainly true for hip-hop. By the early 90s, after Kid Rock had released and toured with his first album, there were many more white rappers and hip-hop artists than there had ever been before. One such example is Marky Mark, otherwise known as Mark Wahlberg, who was to eventually become a successful actor. However, the most famous white rapper, who hit the big time and worldwide fame in 1990, was Vanilla Ice. Vanilla Ice, like Marky Mark, was widely labelled as a hip-hop wannabe. His big hit record, the Queen sampling Ice Ice Baby, instantly showed the world the status he was trying to achieve. That of a tough, mean homeboy. Yet trying to be authentic to the hip-hop lifestyle and earning himself street credibility was ultimately all in vain. Regardless of what the truth actually was, he was quickly accused of play acting and being a fake. As Ice-T once remarked, if Vanilla Ice had street credibility, what street was it? Sesame Street? The hip-hop world, especially its fans, does not take kindly to those who play act. The result was widespread derision, and Vanilla Ice was finished. However, with Vanilla ridiculed, white rappers everywhere started to gain the same reputation. It didn't matter if they were genuinely authentic, hip-hop lovers who had grown up with the culture and supported it all their lives. They were no longer to be tolerated. Kid Rock was one of the genuine ones, but the fact that he was not purely into hip-hop, but also incorporated a whole myriad of influences into his music, was bearing no weight with the record-buying public and media tastemakers. Nor did it seem was it important that he actually had a decent amount of talent. The fact was, he had white skin, and this meant he was now woefully out of fashion. It was inevitable that Kid Rock would get swept along with the whitewash. In the height of it all, Jive Records, finding him surplus to their requirements, dropped him like a stone. He was enraged. To this day, he still harbours great resentment towards Vanilla Ice, Marky Mark, and all those other fakes who had made his life complicated. Due to having grown up in the suburbs, on the streets and with hip-hop on the decks, he rightly declares himself to be qualified and true to the art. He always maintains that he never lifts or steals anything. He merely takes what has always been part of him and puts it into his music. He is one of the few white rappers to whom the age-old phrase, keeping it real, undoubtedly applies. If Kid Rock's interviews and hateful diatribes are anything to go by, Vanilla and Marky should hope that they never get stuck in a lift with him. Vanilla Ice was also the subject of an open letter, written by Kid, telling him to forget about his new rock and rap crossover project he was planning, or else. Regardless of whose fault it was and the politics behind it, the fact remained that Kid Rock was now without a record deal. But he had not come all this way only to be knocked down. And sure enough, he was soon back with a vengeance, and was as rockin' and as angry as ever.
You work, 5 days, and then you have the weekend off. That's usually how it happens. That's typical. And it's just my weekends are a lot longer than most people's, but my work days are a lot longer too.
Despite being dropped by Jive, it was not long before a new deal was forthcoming. After the Vanilla Ice backlash, however, major labels were giving him a wide berth. This time, it was inevitable that only an independent label were prepared to take the risk with Kid Rock. Sure enough, he soon signed a deal with Continuum Records. This was a label that, up until then, was mainly known for giving solo record deals to Rolling Stone members Charlie Watts and Ronnie Wood, plus Pink Floyd guitarist Dave Gilmour. Once more, the Kid was joining an illustrious roster of artists. Although he had a lot to live up to, his task was made much easier when he was given complete creative freedom to write and play what he liked. The result was his 1992 album, The Polyfuse Method. Once more, this record combined heavy rock with hard rap to terrific effect. With track titles like I Am the Bull God and Blow Me amongst its explicit running order, it fast gained a reputation as another crude and uncompromising album. My Oedipus Complex, a brutally honest rap about his estranged father, also explored new lyrical territory. Despite this dangerous edge, critics began to sit up and take notice, with many of them lauding the album for its funky and original crossover style. It was round about this time that the hottest musicians from Detroit would start to hang out with the Kid, experimenting with the beats and beefing up his sound. This was to see the beginning of the Twisted Brown Trucker Band, who are now his regular backing group. He was no longer just a DJ and rapper. Now part of an awesome live unit, a Kid Rock and Twisted Brown Trucker Band performance became essential viewing. After successful jaunts out on the road, while still continuing to embrace the 24/7 party lifestyle, they were fast gaining status as one of the most energetic, full-on and infamous acts around. But despite this winning combination, trouble would once more raise its ugly head. Yet again, it concerned business affairs. Continuum Records, it transpired, still did not seem to be the Kid's most ideal business partner. After the release of the Fire It Up EP in 1994, the label began to have doubts about the strength of the artist they'd signed. Most likely, they were confused. This new EP was a heavy, menacing, and much more experimental affair, as well as one that showed increasing signs of musical and lyrical maturity. The thrust of his new backing band was obviously starting to manifest itself. Not only did it not sound like him, but also it didn't sell very well at all. This was not the Kid Rock that they had signed. This was something a lot darker and sinister. Just like Jive before them, they got cold feet. Kid Rock was dropped soon after. Yet again, he was labelless. From now on, Kid was determined to be in control. Up until then, he had always had his own record label, Top Dog Records, which was the business front he used to deal with Jive and then Continuum Records. Wanting to play second fiddle to no one, he resolved to develop it into an ongoing concern. Although Kid was usually a crazy party animal who lived life to the fullest, this did not mean that he did not have a shrewd and sharp business mind. The first step was to secure an $8,500 loan from his bank. Within 8 months, he had multiplied that loan 15-fold. Not only was his Top Dog record label making megabucks, but he also developed a brand new recording suite. The classy, velvet-walled Temple of the Dog Studios was also reaping rewards and attracting artists far and wide. Kid Rock was not someone to do things by halves, and now he was earning millions of dollars. Soon, he had also bought himself a plush house and car, whilst he naturally continued to live the high life. Whilst the Kid kept rocking, Top Dog was sure living up to its name.
How hard is it to sign one autograph? How much time does it take to pick up the phone and call someone for 5 minutes? Not a lot of time at all, but times that by about 1,000 people. And each one of those 1,000 people is just as important. It's just now that you've made it, everyone wants to talk to you, which you can understand. I would want to talk to somebody in that position, and, hey, remember me? And, you don't really forget anybody. You just don't have time to talk to them all the time anymore.
Now he had the money, Kid had the power to do what he liked with his music. Releasing another album did not require him to sign with anyone else. He could do it all on his own Top Dog label. Mid-1996 saw the release of his third long player, the snappily titled Early Morning Stoned Pimp. With the Twisted Brown Trucker Band also on board, the album took on a much more raw feel and was a significant advancement upon his usual rock and rap fusion. The Midwestern white boy home view remained, but this time filtered through large slabs of G-funk, thunderous rhythms and hard-bitten vocals. It was also arguably the sound of a much older Kid Rock, and assured the world that he never sticks to one idea for long. To reflect this diversity, he had many guest players on the record. These included Eddie Harsh from Southern Fried Rockers, the Black Crowes, and soul diva Thornetta Davis, who had made her name on the cult sub-pop indie label. The album was also noteworthy for being the first album that Kid Rock produced entirely by himself. Lyrically, he also continued to develop and explore new ideas. Although there were still his favourite themes of sex, drugs, money and partying, other issues began to creep in. The penultimate track on the album, Black Chick, White Guy, was a particular example of this. It chronicled a stormy relationship with a woman he had met between the release of his second and third albums. That affair resulted in the birth of his first child in 1993. Parenthood, of course, turns your life upside down. With the responsibility of looking after a child, you find yourself patently unable to do many of the fun things you can enjoy when you are young, free and single. Was Kid Rock going to let this new arrival change his lifestyle? Of course not. It simply meant that now there was an extra dimension to his life. It certainly did not mean that he would make a bad father, or that he was not responsible enough to bring up a baby. Indeed, the courts were trusting enough to award him custody of Junior Ritchie after the relationship broke down. Although his relationship with Junior's mother remained stormy, Kid has proved himself to be an exceptional dad. Despite continuing to party as hard as ever, he never lets it get on top of the important things in life, and that includes bringing up his child the right way. Whenever he takes his boy to school, washes him, cooks for him and so on, he ensures he remains stone cold sober. Although a nanny looks after Junior when Kid is on the road, having a rock and roll dad must be strange and not a little exciting. Obviously, still being young and impressionable, he's exposed to many of the things his father says and does that are not normally witnessed by young eyes and ears. Yet Kid Rock insists on bringing up his child in a liberal, open-minded way, and this includes not telling him what to like. Having himself grown up in a strict Catholic traditionalist family, he knows what it is like to be restricted and dissatisfied. One day, Kid hopes that Junior will figure out the crazy world of rock and roll for himself. Who knows, maybe we'll one day see Little Rock follow in his father's footsteps. With fame, fortune, new business ventures and now a family, Kid Rock may well have achieved everything he wanted. Life had, of course, changed slightly. At home and on weekdays he was a businessman and father. On the road he was the showman and party animal that he had always been. But of course he wanted more, and nothing was going to let him stop striving for that something extra.
I want to have fun. I just want to have fun and not hurt anybody, and all the people around me have a good time and not have to worry about things. Just work hard and have a good time.
Although he had achieved so much, there was still one major thing left on the agenda. Despite releasing 3 kicking albums, going on monster tours and gaining a huge cult following, what the Kid had not done was sell as many records as he would have liked. Naturally, if you make music, you want as many people as possible to hear it. No matter how many tours you undertake, if your records don't sell millions, conquering the world is not an easy task. His Top Dog record label may have been big business, but to all intents and purposes, it was still a minnow in the gigantic ocean that is the music industry. Once more, Kid was going to have to license his name and company out to a larger corporation. But as he was older now, he had a much better idea about the workings of the business than when he was just 17. Still, he would remain in control, but he would be able to ensure more widespread promotion of his name. In the same way that the Jive and Continuum record labels had their own rich histories, Kid ensured that his new business home also had a deep-rooted reputation. Atlantic Records was particularly known to have a colourful background, breaking many types of artists and bands since its inception in 1947. During the 1980s and 1990s especially, when many different musical styles began to blend with one another, the roster of Atlantic Records reflected the new age perfectly. Rock acts such as AC/DC and Stone Temple Pilots were signed to them, as were contemporary artists such as Jewel and Lil' Kim. With the more traditional singers such as Phil Collins and Bette Midler also on its books, Atlantic Records evidently had knowledge and experience that reached across the whole spectrum of music history. With Kid Rock himself being a one-man musical mixture, Atlantic was sure to be the right label for him, at least for the time being. A new deal was signed in 1997. In contrast to his previous deal with Continuum, this time he did not have complete artistic freedom. Generally speaking, if you want to retain total artistic control, signing with a major label is not a good idea. This is something that Kid was diplomatic and honest about. Saying that there was no point in signing to a major record label if he wasn't going to make them any hits, he was now prepared to compromise a little. Whilst other bands may lie and cover up accusations of selling out, Kid openly admits he signed with Atlantic because they kicked out the cash. And, characteristically, he was going to enjoy every penny. If Atlantic didn't realise what they had let themselves in for, they were soon to find out. On the very day he and his band received the advance cheque, Kid took full advantage of this new injection of cash. After renting a limo, driving to a bar, buying drinks all round and sucking the place dry, he and his crew were instantly in high spirits. Too high, perhaps, as soon a mass brawl broke out and everyone ended up spending the night in the county jail. Sure enough, this didn't dent their morale, as the party continued well into the small hours. Now under the financial security and commercial power of a major label, these parties started to become more and more frequent. It was at this stage when his determination to have a good time all of the time almost begun to get on top of the important task in hand, making music. Recording the fourth album was to turn out to be a wild, audacious affair. Instead of writing and recording new songs, Kid and his band were instead more concerned with drink and drugs. The studio became populated with strippers and models, plus there was a large hot bath in the middle of the floor that was normally used by more than one person at a time. They were having such a blast that they began to forget why they were there in the first place. Atlantic Records, sensing the situation, sent Kid and his companion DJ Cracker to Memphis to finish the album. If they wanted the album finished, however, they could have chosen a much better place. Memphis too proved to be awash with temptation, and once again Kid and his DJ blew all their time and money on partying. Atlantic, now frustrated by the reckless nature of their new artist, issued him with an ultimatum. If he didn't finish the record, it wouldn't be released. That kicked him into gear. Within the space of a week, Kid had thrown everybody out of the studio and finished the task all by himself. He had never done so much work before in his life. But nonetheless, he pulled it off admirably. The result was to at last see the record sales that both he and his record company had been hoping for. Kid was, at last, going to be a household name.
I don't know if they do this all over when people go on the Tonight Show, but that was cool. Like back in our hometown, like, you know, people had it on their out front of their bars. Like tonight, you know, Kid Rock on the Tonight Show. You know, everyone goes up there and gathers around. You know, and then when you come on TV, you know, everyone's drunk by the time you come on. Then you come on, and so you just feel that little Detroit in you. And you know, I heard word back from the bars. They're just like, you know, you do it for the hometown.
The release of Devil Without a Cause in 1998 was to prove a turning point for Kid Rock. With Atlantic Records happy with its commercial viability, and Kid himself not having to compromise too much of his original style, at last things seemed to be on the right track. Once again, the music was a full-on assault of hard rock, b-boy boogie and screaming party attitude. As ever, you could find all styles of music in there if you were to dig deep enough. Rock and rap was prevalent, of course, but folk, country, psychedelic rock and samples also played a huge part. Songs such as the title track or I Got One For You set the scene perfectly, with their mixture of the Twisted Brown Trucker Band's menacing stomp and Kid winding his raps around loops from his 808 sampler. Most unusually of all, Only God Knows Why, a country ballad, showed off a rare sensitive side and demonstrated that Kid could not only rap, but sing as well. Due to the bizarre and frantic nature of its recording, the album was virtually all his own work. Produced by Kid Rock and the Twisted Brown Trucker Band, several of the tracks featured Kid playing all the instruments himself. His extensive use of samplers also used excerpts from classic songs by Fleetwood Mac and the Politicians, once again showing the diverse nature of the sound. It did, however, include proper guest appearances. Blues musician Robert Bradley, also from Detroit, was one of his many homies who turned up on the record and kept up the Midwestern groove. Most notably, it also included the latest white boy hip-hop sensation, Eminem. Like Kid, Eminem grew up in Detroit, and he had been inspired by the music of Kid Rock himself. Now signed to rap legend Dr. Dre's label Aftermath, thanks to him and Kid, Detroit had been unanimously declared as the white rap capital of the world. Finally, following 4 attempts, Kid Rock had a serious smash hit record. After only 1 year of release, sales of Devil Without a Cause had surpassed the 4 million mark. A single, the funky and furious Cowboy, helped to boost sales outside America, whilst his music was beginning to find its way onto more than just his own albums. MTV's The Beach House and ABC's World of Sports featured his tracks as theme music, whilst the song Somebody's Gonna Feel This was included on the Atlantic label's Road Rash 3D soundtrack. The world was at last waking up to the Kid. And the person least surprised by this newfound world-beating success was Kid himself. Having always had faith that his music was good enough to be up there with the very best of them, he knew that if the backing was there, he would hit the heights. Atlantic had given him the push, and with both rock and rap radio stations now playing his songs without fear of repercussions, things were going very well indeed. The extent of Kid's success even stretched to the sporting world, when the Detroit Red Wings basketball team chose the opening rap from Early Morning Stone Pimp as their victory chant. The cry, "Ain't no party like a Detroit party 'cause a Detroit party don't stop," was now heard to reverberate around sporting arenas as well as on the TV and radio. The Kid was not only rocking but rolling as well. But it still wasn't enough, and yet more was to come.
The label's top dog, and gonna have a release from Joe C, hopefully before the first of the year, and also my DJ Cracker, his project's called Hal Jarvis, and a Twisted Brown Trucker record as well, and maybe a group called Paradigm.
Now Kid Rock was a rapidly growing global sensation. He was kept as busy as ever. But there was no way that he was going to stick to conventional ways of doing things. Nor was he going to be any less outrageous or bizarre with his new ideas. It was with his performances in particular where he really drove home his rock and roll message. As well as the setup, 2 sets of decks and drums, guitars, rows of keyboards and the occasional explosion, the costumes and people on stage were as attention-grabbing as the music. With strippers and pimp suits, with Kid flourishing in the spotlight, his shows are more than just a rock concert. They are pure showbiz entertainment. Having recently toured with rock gods Monster Magnet, plus Ice Cube and Too Short back in the early days, Kid now begun to set his sights on his own headlining gigs. 1999 saw his first major world tour, including a 3-week visit to Europe and 2 months on the American circuit. These tour dates included places such as Texas, Iowa and Indiana, but missed out more standard locations such as New York and Los Angeles. Kid's reason for this is simple. He wants to play where he knows the crowds will be up for it, and where better than the Midwest, where he first learned his craft. Those who have seen a Kid Rock performance may well have also had a surprise. Acting as a sidekick to Kid and providing backing vocals throughout the gig is someone who looks and sounds like he's little over 8 years old, winding the crowd up with a crude and hyperactive performance, providing them with explosive bursts of energy. You might think that this is strange behaviour for someone so young. But this guy is actually in his mid-20s. Joe Kalija, or Joe C for short, was discovered by the band backstage one night. Smoking a blunt and drinking from a beer can, this was clearly no child. Kid had seen him around in the crowd several times before, and despite not exactly being the king of moral behaviour himself, he thought it a little freaky that parents would want to take their child to Kid Rock gigs. As it turns out, Joe C has celiac disease, a digestive disorder which stunted his growth and left him only 3 feet 9 inches tall. Yet despite having to take continual medication, he's as mad and as bad as Kid Rock himself. In other words, he's a perfect addition to the Twisted Brown Trucker Band. It now seems that everyone associated with the Kid is growing into stars in their own right. Not only does Joe C have a solo album produced by Kid in the pipeline, but the Twisted Brown Trucker Band and DJ Cracker also have their own records planned for the future. Not to be outdone, Kid Rock is finding himself in demand as a guest performer on many other artists' albums. Tony Iommi, the Black Sabbath guitarist, and Tommy Lee, the Motley Crue drummer, have all had his white b-boy attitude laden onto their records. There is also talk of him collaborating with his label mate, the saucy and foxy rapper Lil' Kim, plus a chance of working with the biggest hip-hop star in the world, Puff Daddy. Yet it is not only rock and rap stars who work with him. Even the world of animation has now got into the Kid Rock vibe. The track on the South Park Chef Aid album, Kyle's Mom is a Big Fat Bitch, included Kid Rock and his band as collaborators and has become a modern-day anti-hero classic. If one cult animation wasn't enough, a special Simpsons episode, to be shown in the year 2000, is to feature Kid and Josie as special featured guests. With other plans including the release of a personalised home video, plus shooting a film with the son of legendary country singer Hank Williams, Kid Rock has surely arrived as the star he was always going to be. But as in all cases of hitting the big time, it is never certain how long it will last. And the one who knows the least of all is Kid himself.
If you're a tough guy, people are always going to want to take a shot at you.
In the 1990s, where so much on the music scene had become tame, conventional and severely lacking in rock and roll attitude, Kid Rock and the Twisted Brown Trucker Band were a breath of fresh air. They're smart, lewd, outrageous, genuine and righteous, just like any other good rock band should be. Injecting the music industry with their own brand of dirt and debauchery, wholesomeness is the very last thing on their minds. Other than when he is looking after his child, there is no shame in Kid Rock's game. He's one of the few stars around today that has genuine rock attitude and punk spirit. Even if you never hear his music, you just need to look at the photographs. In most of them, Kid is seen to proudly give the one-fingered salute. It has been claimed that nobody else can give the bird quite like he can. Yet despite being the most credible pop star in America, Kid gets self-effacing and even a little embarrassed if anyone tries to call him the saviour of rock and roll. Perhaps he is genuinely modest, but for someone who said in the lyrics of his albums that they would reach platinum sales, modesty may be unlikely. The truth could be that he just knows the limitations of what he's achieved. Ultimately, he has not achieved anything particularly new. He may have blended rock and rap with several other styles thrown into the mix, yet several other bands were already doing this long before he came along. However, despite not being outstandingly innovative, he is at least distinctive and one of the best at what he does. This was perhaps always his intention. Pioneers, although often earning themselves a place in the history books, traditionally end up penniless. Of course, this is not the Kid's style. Instead, he let other people break the new ground, only to come along himself a few years later and show everyone how to really do it. As he has always said, he is here for a good time, not for a long time. Longevity may therefore not be on the cards. Even his record label Atlantic told him that they may drop him a few years down the line should he fall out of favour. Being someone who lives for the moment, Kid admired this honesty, but it is not like him to be too concerned. With his own record label and street-smart attitude, it is unlikely that he will ever be out of the spotlight for long. Having grown up on the streets, later to hit the big time, the concept of selling out is never too far from his and his fans' minds. Some compromises may have had to have been made when signing the record deal, but it is widely acknowledged that Kid is anything but a sellout. Staying true to his background, he has never pretended to be anything that he is not. Always open and honest, sometimes to a fault, he has relinquished none of his beliefs and attitudes just to get commercial success. Even the task of having to curb his lyrics has been done with tongue planted firmly in cheek, such as when a line from Cowboy was bleeped out by a sarcastic voice saying the words "radio edit." The question remains, what next for Kid Rock? Whatever happens, with the breakthrough success of Devil Without a Cause, a chapter has ended in his career. It was sealed in perhaps a very symbolic way. At the 1999 MTV Awards show, Kid Rock and Josie stormed onto the stage with the Twisted Brown Trucker Band kicking up a glorious racket behind them. Strutting on stage next to them was hip-hop heroes Run DMC and evergreen rockers Aerosmith. Between them, they all belted out the song that started it all off way back in 1986. That song was, of course, Walk This Way. Even the title is appropriate to Kid. Young Bob Ritchie, after all, had used the same formula as this very song, building his career on its simple crossover concept. With his own unique approach and strength of character, he had hit the heights just like his heroes he was now performing with. He had walked that way indeed. Yet Kid had succeeded where hundreds of others failed. The secret of his success is a combination of many things. Grit, determination, and sheer brazen attitude would no doubt be among them. Authenticity and the knowledge that he has lived what he raps about have also given him the edge on other rock star wannabes. But perhaps the most likely explanation is to be found written in the sleeve notes of the Devil Without a Cause album. It's one of Kid's favourite quotes, and its message is simple. It says, "If it looks good, you'll see it. If it sounds good, you'll hear it. If it's marketed right, you'll buy it. But if it's real, you'll feel it." For as long as Kid continues to live it, there will always be those who feel it. This, of course, is one of the very reasons that rock and roll exists. As Kid himself said, "There ain't no party like a Kid Rock party, 'cause a Kid Rock party don't stop."
Thank you for buying Maximum Kid Rock. We hope you enjoyed it. Watch out for further titles on Chrome Dreams coming up soon. If you did enjoy it or have any comments or suggestions, write to us at Chrome Dreams, PO Box 230, New Malden, Surrey, UK, KT3 6YY, and tell us so. We've got free copies of our next release for the best letters, so don't forget to include your name and address. Thanks again for listening, and goodbye for now.